Welcome to Sino-Warfare with Ralph D. Sawyer, the astonishing reversal at Jimo. Let's begin by noting that the enormously famous Battle of Jimo was really a psychological struggle for Jimo, a well-fortified small city that managed to survive a 3-year siege before its dwindling troops finally broke out and vanquished the enemy. It's a tale of brilliant leadership, unorthodox tactics, and resilience, rather than an open field clash marked by massive forces and stalwart heroism. During the Warring States period, Jimo and Ju, two small cities in the eastern state of Qi, came under siege after they withstood an initial attack by a large coalition army under Yan's leadership in 284 BC. Virtually all the significant old line states had participated in the coalition, including Qin, Chu, Han, Wei, and Zhao. Qin's presence was probably ill-advised because it had long been striving to conquer the remaining feudal states. Yan, which had been harboring its resources, training its military, and growing more prosperous while the other states engaged in interminable battles, perceived an opportunity to strike a blow against Qi, its longtime enemy, when the state of Qi launched an assault on the smaller state of Sung, thereby ignoring Sun's warning about making itself susceptible to external attack. Under the distinguished strategist and commander Yue, the much larger coalition force easily defeated Qi's expeditionary army in Sung. Yue then dismissed the rest of the coalition, while Yan's army, by itself, pursued Qi's remnant forces as they retreated northward toward their capital of Linzi. Yan's forces quickly penetrated the capital, seized all of Qi's treasures, and burned the palaces and ancestral temples before proceeding to sweep across the state itself in an ever-victorious thrust. Within 6 months, some 70 cities and towns capitulated. Only 3 remained unconquered: Liao, Zhu, and Jimo. Now the ease with which Yan's army vanquished its enemies, despite Qi's vaunted military heritage, by exploiting repeated tactical imbalances, as Sun discussed, is astonishing. After all, Qi had been founded by the great Zhou strategist known as the Taigong, and Duke Huan of Qi had been the realm's first real hegemon, although with Guanzhong's help, in the early spring and autumn period. The campaign's swiftness well accorded with Sun's emphasis upon speed, mobility, aggressive action. However, as commonly happened in China, success bred resentment and criticism, and conservative strategists decried this rapid advance into Qi's heartland as foolhardy and stupid. So now, after stunning achievements in the first year, the campaign became moribund, apparently stymied by Zhu and Jimo's defiance. Although most of Qi had easily been vanquished, and the king himself had fled, Yue made no effort to overcome them with the sort of fervent assaults increasingly seen over the last 2 centuries, because cities had become crucial strategic objectives, much as Sun Bin discussed, rather simply than targets of opportunity, and equipment had evolved to facilitate attacks. Yue's restraint may have stemmed from Sun's belief that attacking fortified cities is the lowest possible strategy. Although there were alternatives, you could use incendiaries, but there wasn't much bait left to motivate them to hasty action. Yue initiated long-term sieges. Unfortunately for him, the defenders remained resolute. Nearly 3 years passed in a standoff, despite the misery the people had to endure. The impasse created a golden opportunity for Yue's detractors, at least one of whom accused him of subversion. According to the Shurji's account, which is the basis of our explication, quote, "Someone slandered Yue to the king of Zhao of Yan. Yue's wisdom and planning surpass other men. After he attacked Qi, within the space of a single breath, he conquered more than 70 cities. Only 2 cities haven't surrendered. It isn't that he lacks the strength to reduce them, the reason he hasn't attacked for 3 years. He wants to take advantage of the army's awesomeness to force all the people of Qi to submit. Then he will face south and become king. The slanderer even concocted a purported explanation for why Yue hadn't acted before this. Quote again, "The reason he hasn't initiated his plan is because his wife and children are in Yan. However, in Qi there are many beautiful women, so he will eventually forget them." Unconvinced, King Zhao had the critic beheaded, which of course silenced further accusations. However, his son, who shortly thereafter succeeded him, had previously quarreled with Yue. Short-sighted and inexperienced, he was highly susceptible to slander and innuendo. Now, down in Jimo, hearing of King Zhao's death, in 279 BC, Tian Dan, who had assumed command in Jimo through popular acclaim, quickly moved to exploit the ruler's weak character by resurrecting the previous accusation. And then he added that Yue only feared being replaced by another general. A double agent succeeded in bringing the charge to the king's ear, resulting in Yue's recall and the appointment of Qi Jie as commander-in-chief. Knowing he would probably be executed upon his return to Yan, Yue defected to the state of Zhao, which happily honored him and appointed him as a general, just to deter Yan from attacking. The preliminaries now over, Tian Dan focused on manipulating the enemy through disinformation while reviving the morale and commitment of his own troops to nourish their confidence in his leadership. He concocted an appeal to the spirits that had the collateral effect of puzzling the enemy, again according to the Shiji. Tian Dan ordered that whenever they ate, the people in the city should sacrifice to their ancestors in their courtyards. The birds flying about then all hovered and danced over the city, and then descended to eat. Yan's soldiers found this very strange. Tian Dan then proclaimed, "A spirit has descended to instruct me." To further give his ploy body, he disguised an ordinary man as a spiritual teacher. Quote, "Tian Dan said to the inhabitants, 'There ought to be a spiritual man here who can act as my teacher.' One soldier spoke up, 'Can I be your teacher?' But then he turned around and went away. Tian Dan got up and had the man returned, seated him in the east, and treated him as his teacher. The soldier said, 'I tricked you. I truly am without ability.' Tian Dan said, 'Don't speak.' Thereupon he made him his apparent teacher. Every time he set forth any covenants or constraints, he would invariably attribute them to this spiritual teacher. Now, having instilled confidence through what the military theorists would subsequently call an appeal to the spirits, he moved to stimulate the populace. First, he tricked the enemy into engaging in inimical actions that would shock and induce fear. He publicly announced, "The only thing I fear is that Yan's army might cut off the noses of our countrymen who have been captive, and then parade them in front of us. If they then engage us in battle, Jimo will be defeated." Naturally, when Yan's soldiers heard this, they acted accordingly without thinking about the possible effects. Seeing their compatriots, now Yan's prisoners, with their noses cut off, naturally terrified Jimo's inhabitants. This prompted them to redouble their defensive efforts out of fear that they too might be captured and suffer a similar fate. Then, to anger them, no doubt in concord with Sun's assertion that what stimulates men to kill the enemy is anger, he employed disinformation agents who said, "The only thing that Yan's soldiers fear is that you will excavate the graves outside the city and disgrace our ancestors. This would turn our hearts cold." As if on cue, when Yan's army excavated the funeral mounds and the graves and burned the dead, the populace wept and reportedly wanted to rush forth and engage in battle. It's said that their anger increased tenfold. To solidify their allegiance and unify the people, Tian Dan then adopted Wu Qi's practice of sharing every hardship with them, including the repair of the fortifications, and he even enrolled his wife and concubines in the ranks. Again, in according with the great General Wu Qi's discussion of the importance of feasting the troops, he personally dispensed the food and drink to the officers. For the final stage of his manipulation, he had all the armored soldiers conceal themselves and position the old, the weak, women, children atop the walls. Having displayed a facade of weakness to foster arrogance and disdain in the enemy, he then induced laxity in the command hierarchy itself by commandeering all the gold within the city and using it to bribe the enemy's generals. And he said, quote, "When Jimo surrenders, we hope that you will not plunder our homes, nor make prisoners of our wives and concubines, but let us be in peace." Naturally, they agreed, and Yan's formerly watchful stance deteriorated significantly. Having worked to manipulate and mislead the enemy, just as Sun advised, Tian turned to the preparations needed to break out and actually defeat their significantly superior enemy. First, they bored dozens of holes in the walls large enough for men and cattle to pass through. Then he had the 1,000 or so cattle remaining in the city gathered and covered with red silk, decorated with 5 colored dragon veins. Naked blades were affixed to their horns. Oil-soaked reeds were bound to their tails. That night they set the firebrands on the cattle tails on fire before sending them out the sally ports. The enraged cattle raced into Yan's lines, followed by 5,000 picked soldiers. According to the Shurji depiction, as it was the middle of the night, Yan's forces were terrified. The brightness of the burning torches on the cattle tails was dazzling. Wherever Yan's soldiers looked, they saw dragon veins. Anyone the cattle struck died or was wounded. Taking advantage of the confusion, 5,000 Qi soldiers with gagged mouths, accompanied by a great drumming and clamor from the city, suddenly attacked. The old and the weak all made their bronze implements resound by striking them. The tumult moved heaven and earth. Terrified, Yan's army ran off in defeat, and the commander Shijie was slain. Yan's flight prompted the long submissive cities to revolt from Yan's yoke, one after another as the fleeing soldiers passed by, and throw their allegiance to Tian Dan. The state of Qi was eventually restored, and the monarch returned. Although ruthless, Tian Dan clearly understood what was necessary to reverse an otherwise hopeless situation and rescue the state from oblivion. Despite being criticized by later pedants for his duplicity, Tian Dan's systematic use of deceit and disinformation revived his forces and manipulated his opponents. Yan's confident commanders, laxly waiting for Jimo's supposedly inevitable surrender, never anticipated its forces would be capable of forceful action. Qi's reversal of fate quickly became a famous example of command acumen, coupled with strategically conceived covert action, one that would ever after be cited in tactical discussions of manipulation and the unorthodox that are found in China's many military manuals. As always, thank you for watching.